going to
last
work.
night, but they were trying to figure out a way to get attendance up and everything. And I said that our representative of the CNFR committee, we ought to have a councilman ride the bull. And I figured that would definitely get.
That generates some interest.
Exactly, you know? I don't think you.
Maybe a headline.
I figured it would be a heck of
Maybe a death.
weekend.
I wouldn't even want to do the mutton busting.
Yeah, amen.
Well, sorry for the late start, folks. We'll get started, and I'm sure Ken will be here shortly. So I haven't heard anything from him. Have you?
No, sir.
All right. How did we do last week? Any concerns about how the meeting went? Anything else we need to take care of that was brought up? Guess not. Okay.
We were great.
We were great. There you have it. Would you get that in the minutes? Okay.
That's
All right. Well, let's move right on to the S.A.F.E project. It's in the paper today. Let's talk a little more about it. Pardon?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Good evening. Appreciate being with you tonight. This item is with regard to the potential for investing in our city hall facility, and your appetite with regard to what that might include. Fundamentally, that's what this is all about. As you may be aware, staff is struggling with the balance between the steps that we would want to consider to harden the building as it relates to potential active shooter kinds of issues, and remaining a good customer service oriented building. And so we have some ideas as it relates to trying to strike that appropriate balance, but we want your feedback with regard to some of the general concepts that we have kind of put together with State Line's help. Coupled with that, however, is not only do we have the security issues that we're concerned about, and hopefully you'll agree that they're legitimate things to be concerned about, but also we have a number of ADA issues that just have not been dealt with over the years. And for a building that serves the public and hopefully the broad swath of our constituency, that too is something that you would agree we should be concerned about. The question, of course, will be to what degree and by how much, and at what facet of the building's services should we be concerned about in that regard as well. We do have issues with the building as well as it relates to the aging of the building. Fire suppression currently is out of code and potentially inadequate. HVAC is definitely an issue that we are struggling with fairly routinely. We simply have physical plant issues as well as it relates to this 40-year-old building that we're in. What we hope to propose to you tonight will deal with security issues, we'll deal with ADA inadequacies. We think we'll also deal with the aging issues of the building. We also believe that some slight modifications of the building's footprint will help us to deal with, the growing employee body in the organization as well, and maybe build out for the future if we do it right. Again, our question, however, is what your tolerance is of these ideas, whether or not you think it comports with the needs and the will of the community, and whether or not you agree that the investment that we would suggest, which as you have seen at least preliminarily at this point, could be in the neighborhood of $3 million, is appropriate to extend the life of this building. And we certainly believe that life could be another 20 years, which in contrast with building a brand new building, we think a $3 million figure in comparison to a building new kind of figure is pretty stark. So, with that in mind, if it would please the council, I would like to turn the time over to our S.A.F.E team as well as Mr. Murtha and his team, and walk you through the general concepts. We hope to get some feedback from you today on that, and with that feedback, we would then go back to the drawing board, do some homework, and bring you some better refined cost data and ways in which, if you agree, we could tackle that cost over time. Okay?
So I'm Lyle Murtha with State Line Architects, and I've been helping the city with this S.A.F.E project. And SAFE meaning secure, attractive, functional, and efficient. You've all been briefed in executive session about the secure aspects of this building, so I don't want to talk about those in a public open meeting and expose your vulnerabilities. So I'm not going to talk about the secure items, but I'll talk about all the other ones. So when we start a project like this, normally we start with what we call programming. We interview each of the departments that you have within the building. We check to make sure their square footage is adequate. We make sure future expansion needs are going to be met when we do any type of remodel like this. We know you lost some staff during the past hiring freeze, so we want to make sure we account for any staff that they want to bring back on in the future, and also future growth. So we make sure that all of your spaces are going to be good to go for the next 20 years, like Carter said. And then lastly, we look at the adjacencies. We want to make sure that everyone within your building is adjacent to the other agencies that they need to be cooperating with on a daily basis. So in general, most of your departments were okay with their locations, with their adjacencies, with just a few exceptions, and I'm not going to go into those in detail, but I'll explain them as I go through the design. So before I start, I'd like to just state your existing building design for its time, 40 years ago, was really ahead of its time. It's obvious that the concept of this building was for open access to government, and that's been expressed in the building layout, the open airy atrium that you have in the building, lots of glass and views right into the different departments, as well as the open stairs and the circulation throughout the building. So my concept is to preserve as much of that original concept as I can while still addressing all those safety concerns. So as you know, there's been previous committees that have been looking at this same project over the years, and I think you've been briefed about that in the executive session as well. So the concept I'm going to present to you is really thinking outside the box to approach this. So I started with the outside of the building, which really hasn't changed much. Go back a slide, actually. So this is the original building drawing. On the west side of your building, you have staff parking, which is pretty much maintained that way. You have some parking for fire and police south of the building. You have two entries, one on the east, one on the south, and then staff entry from the west. Some limited on-street parking for visitors, and then some assigned visitor parking on the west side of the building. So from a customer standpoint, customer service standpoint, it really makes sense to have one access point to your building. So I noted that this original building comes close to achieving that. If you were to limit access to your west side entry and have it be staff only, and you allowed only public access from your east and south, you come really close to having that one point of access for customer service. So we'll move on to the first floor plan. So your current floor plan is on the left, the proposed is on the right. We left the proposed very sketchy. Nothing is finalized here. We just really want your reaction to this. But to continue the discussion of that outside, having those two entries, one on the east and one on the south. What we would propose is enhancing those entries on the exterior, making them feel more like a plaza, so adding benches, lighting, more concrete, a little bit of landscaping. So you really enhance the entry, you define the entry, you make it more inviting as well. So then a lot of our thoughts also including killing a couple birds with one stone. Carter mentioned you have ADA restrooms just outside the council chambers here that are not up to ADA standards. So our thought was, rather than reconstruct those in place, if you're going to have to reconstruct them, maybe we reconstruct them elsewhere and free up that space. Your council meeting room, your council workroom, the workroom that we're in right now, is also really easy to relocate. That would free up a whole zone within the building that would allow you to have both of these entries come into one common customer service point with a reception desk, several people there to greet people behind a glass enclosure. It would also allow us to cordon off the rest of the building, so you really have just a public zone where people can't go beyond unless they're allowed to by city staff by checking in at the customer service point, or staff coming down to greet that individual there. It also allows people that are quick in and out, if they're just there to pay a bill or ask a simple question, they come to the customer window, they're in and out pretty quickly without having to wander all throughout the building.
Just so I can get my bearing, where is the current council meeting room near the entrance? And not this one, but the one down,
The council chambers.
Downstairs.
the downstairs.
Downstairs meeting room is right there.
Right there, yeah.
Both.
Thanks.
So we do retain that moving forward. So in this concept, obviously human resources gets displaced. And my original idea was maybe they're off-site, and then I was informed that maybe you would sell some of those outbuildings to pay for this project, so maybe they have to be brought back on-site. So I can't fit them in with the square footage requirements, so it would require an addition of about 500 square feet to fit them back into the building. This also allows us to have an extra meeting room. This is a council workroom, an extra meeting room. We could outfit them with operable walls so that you could open it all up to one large training room, which you'd be losing in the city center building if you sell that building off. So then just a few other things on this first floor plan. The city attorney is lacking a couple of office spaces. They're quite congested. And the city clerk is remote currently from the vault, which they manage. So it makes sense to move the city clerk over near the vault, which they manage, and a simple remodel would allow city attorney to expand and gain a couple of offices. Where the customer service niche is currently, that would become a mother's room, which is a requirement now. And then we also redo or revise this staff entry a little bit so that we could get off-site city staff who have issues with HR to come in discreetly without having to be seen by everybody.
Steve?
In the bigger scheme of things, what happens to the drive-up payments and where is customer parking?
So go back to the site plan drawing. So go to the next slide. Okay. So right now there's visitor parking here. This window is not in active use.
No, but there are drop-off boxes there and people use that.
And we could locate those elsewhere or even leave them there. But the only modification we were making to the site was taking these visitor parking and exchanging them for the council sign visitor parking, just flipping those two so that the visitors are closer to the entrance.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions on that first floor discussion before I go on to the second floor? So on the second floor, really just minor renovation involved up here. So again, the restroom needs to be upgraded to ADA compliance. We bring payroll up into financial services where they belong. We create a little break alcove because there is no break room on the second level. And right now, all the departments sort of have their own break room. They have a refrigerator, a coffee pot, a sink. So this would consolidate all those and make it a little bit more efficient. We're not wasting energy by having all those separate utilities around the building. And then we would outfit this floor with door accesses that allow city departments to exit the building onto an exterior stair to egress the building. In the case that there's a fire or something and this atrium gets filled with smoke, there's another way out for city staff off the second level. There's a need, I guess, to bring manager or mayor's office into the city manager's suite. So in order to do that, I capture a little bit of space in what's now just a open meeting area off the atrium. I just enclose that, make it the city manager's meeting room, move the city manager into what is now his meeting room, and then that opens up some space for a couple more offices.
As far as community development and your downstairs services, normally people come to community development for building permits, things along those lines. Are you looking then at reorganizing that to where they would be down in the customer service area down here?
We've discussed either bringing one of their receptionists down here so they could serve those people, or having people sign in and being buzzed up
Okay.
to the department. We haven't decided on any of that specifically.
Few questions. The space that's behind where you're talking about putting the receptionist, that big triangle, no, right behind it, right there, that there, with your new plan, what is that space gonna be used as? I mean, what's the purpose of that space?
Still an atrium, still a lobby. You can still do public events, things in there. Again, there's some times when you would just open these doors and allow public in. So like you're doing a Midwest Avenue reconstruction project rollout and you want the community to come in, you can still do that in this atrium.
Okay. My other question is you're looking at expanding out for the bottom floor. Why not just do top and bottom, then just do one floor? I don't understand the purpose behind that.
So we've discussed maybe even designing this for a second floor level in the future. Or, I mean, right now we don't need extra space on the second floor necessarily. We just need it on the first floor for HR. Is that answering your question?
Okay.
Or?
Yeah, if it's there, I'm one of those that might as well just have it available than to look at a project in the future. Now we need to build up, and it would possibly cost more now to build up, change everything, do this and that, all the construction, why not just hit it all in one spot? I know that it raised the price a bit, but it's hit it once, then it's either pay me now or pay me later. Either way, you're gonna pay. I guess I look at it as, the glass windows, we talk about wanting it to be inviting, but my thoughts is, and I don't know where anybody else is, but like when I go into the courthouse, the new courthouse, I walk up to turn in documents and they come to the window, I don't feel very invited with that. I feel there's a disconnect. It's go in, turn it in, get the heck out of there. And maybe that's the purpose, but I thought we would want it more inviting. It just, my thoughts on it is what I was just throwing.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, the question about the level of expansion is a really important question, and what Lyle is indicating is indicative of some of the conversation that we've had internally as to what might be too much or potentially advantageous. What we would suggest is that with regard to the expansion that we're showing you here, which really is just that thumb on the back of the building there, as being what would meet what we can see for our short-term horizon, the next 10 to 15 years in terms of employee growth and service need and that kind of thing. But the reality is there's opportunity area not only with regard to what could be a second floor on top of that thumb, if you will, but also the area where Lyle is kind of pointing right now in terms of blowing out another wall and adding another aspect to that first floor. So indeed, we would design with expansion and opportunity area in mind. But if in fact, council wanted to discuss that further too, we could bring additional detail for that as well.
Steve, and then
Don't we have some staff that is not located in this building?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, the concern is more along the lines of not necessarily consolidating all of the city center people into this building, but rather getting an adequate space within the building with regard to our current needs that we have with, fitting staff in the appropriate places, as well as just having an eye towards the future just a little bit with regard to where we think staffing might be going. And so we certainly do want to consolidate the appropriate staff into this building as much as we can, but to try to consolidate all of City Center into this building would definitely be beyond the scope that we envision for this level of future evaluation right now.
But, as a follow-up, but wouldn't that, if we did go ahead, wouldn't that allow us to dispose of property, which would then make the addition more palatable, so to speak?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, I think there is definitely some argument in that direction with regard to what we would do with the space at City Center and the people that are there. And you consider the space that we will be gaining with the police station, space we could potentially be gaining with a fire department expansion as well with a new Station 1 and potentially repurposing existing Station 1. A lot of those conversations, I think, do have some dovetailing that council would probably want to be very familiar with before you feel totally comfortable with regard to where we should go with this footprint and some of those opportunity areas.
Ken, and then Mike.
But the addition, how many parking spots will the customers lose by putting that in? You showed that they would still have that whole thing, but it looks like that would take
There's
away.
5 spaces we'd lose.
So that would make it less, that'd make it tougher because the streets are always full.
These spaces, again, we're thinking we're signing for council for meetings such as this, and the public are actually parking over here.
Would they gain more than?
We would net lose 5 spaces overall.
Mr. Mayor, to tag on to that question that Councilman Bates has, the question I'm still confused about though, Lyle, is whether or not by relocating that customer bank of parking compared to the customer bank of parking we have currently, is there any net difference at all?
Oh, I didn't count them, but they look to be almost the same. There might
We
be
also have the state lots that we will be
Right.
leasing.
Correct.
That's gonna be a while, so.
Yeah.
Mike?
In the city center building, I know the fire department administration's over there, and I think HR's over there. What else is over there, if anything?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, actually what we have is we have fire administration. We also have some police administration. We have a training facility that's used by both of them relatively frequently. But we no longer have HR over there.
Oh, okay.
HR is actually just right over here.
They're in
this building, yes, right across the hall.
HR is this one.
Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One of the things when we built this 41 years ago, IT probably took up less than less than half of this office.
Yeah.
Where are they going again over on?
Go to the next floor. So they're staying, information services stays with.
Yeah, okay. So wait, they'll remain about the same square
Yeah.
footage?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Lyle, it's been a couple of years since we talked about this building, but I vaguely recall that there was some discussion about the amount of space per employee being below industry standards. Is there some kind of calculus you use to say, well, if you have this many employees, this amount, how much office space you need to have per employee? Or does that vary so much that you
Not
can't
really.
say?
Different, like the state has certain standards for office size if you're a regular employee versus a supervisor versus a director, but it just varies across the board depending on what entity. There's no really standard. I mean, there's building codes that tell you can, 100 square foot per person in an office is about right. So you have a 35,000 square foot plus or minus building. I don't know how many employees total are in here.
But you weren't hearing consistently, we're too cramped, we don't have enough room for
No,
everybody here.
with the exception of the attorney needing a couple of offices and the ones that I pointed out, nobody's screaming about wanting to move or really needing a lot more space.
Did some
Even
serious
with growth,
downsizing too.
even with growth and bringing people back on who were positions that were vacated.
Bob?
Thank you, sir. Regarding restrooms, ADA restrooms, we're gonna take the doors off somehow, the turns in it.
Yeah, I have taken, you probably can't see it very well, but yeah, we've taken the doors
Yeah,
off.
good.
It's I mean, you don't want that from a perspective of somebody maybe being accosted in the bathroom and they can't be heard outside either, so.
And then going back to Ken's concern, I think we're probably like everyone else trying to balance how do we appear inviting, but we're still focusing on safety of our employees in case. Is it your sense that this design is the kind of balance that a lot of people are arriving at? Are we erring on one side or the other, do you think?
So the state office building, for example, we have a similar concept where we bring everyone into one point. They don't have a security checkpoint like a scanner and all of that, but they have the opportunity to add that in the future. You guys, same way, bring everyone into one point. You probably can't afford that scanner right now, but you have the opportunity to add it maybe later if you think you need it.
Is it your sense that this is the solution a lot of people are arriving at, trying to create a more secure, because I know the schools are all designed differently, you go in the door, but you buzz before and you can only go to the office before you can get to anything else in the building. It's
We
not
do
as
a lot
friendly
of-
as it used to be, but.
We do a lot of security vestibules. Everyone's generally going to this, funnel everyone into one point, be greeted, be viewed. Someone can see you. Are you hostile? Are you angry? Do we need to keep you out there and not let you in past? That is where we're going. Schools are going there. Public facilities are going there.
Other questions? Yeah, Mike.
Well, and I know that, you know, there's some square footage issues and things like that, but, you know, looking at this, how many people come to City Hall to visit with the city clerk? How many people come here to go to the city attorney's office? A lot more people, I suspect, come to go to the city engineer's office and some of that. So, do you give any thought to, you know, putting the city attorney and the clerk on the elevator and bringing the city engineer's office down to the ground floor? Or?
We discussed all of that. And first, that would take a lot of remodel to get those departments, because they don't just swap out perfectly, you know, one for another.
Because those areas upstairs are more open floor plan, are they? I think?
And then what it doesn't do is solve the problem of everyone just has open access to your whole building. All it does is.
Well, but you wouldn't have all those people going upstairs.
Right,
To
it just-
transact business.
it just
That's
takes
part of
away
what I'm
the
asking
circulation.
is, you know, are there a lot more people going to the clerk's office and the city attorney's office than what I think?
Slightly more. I don't think anyone, engineer and community development wasn't astronomical more than the people who are on the
Okay,
first
so
floor.
not as many more as I would have presumed.
It's not as many. I didn't bring our
Yeah,
documents,
okay.
but I asked everyone how much traffic they see, how many people per day on average, and it wasn't like, oh my God.
So
we're
you're
sending-
not thinking that bringing them downstairs would decrease the upstairs traffic by all that much?
I don't think so.
That was part of why I asked about the community development, because of people coming in for the building permits and stuff. And he has made the plans to put some of those people downstairs. in
Yeah,
that
well,
area.
yeah, but, you know, anytime I've ever been there, well, we've gotta go talk to somebody else, because they never have anything that's a normal question.
Drop it off and get back to you.
And this was vetted by all the department heads, and they all agreed this is the direction that they wanted to proceed.
And Lyle, when you've done similar plans to try to create a more safe environment, would we buzz somebody to whatever location they need to go to? Would they need to be escorted to that area?
I wouldn't think you'd need to be escorted. I think if you got them signed in and they didn't look hostile, and there's a lot of people that are regulars, if you will, going to the building department or planning department. If you're an architect or a contractor in this town, they probably know you already on site.
Other questions for Lyle?
I might request, that's really hard to make out, so is that. Could we just get a bigger picture of that? And I'm not, I know we're in really, really early design here, but when we get closer, maybe, I'm a little curious about how this works. And you can't really tell. That guy right there beside the chamber, council chambers.
Mike?
Is there kind of like an industry standard or something? You know, this building was completed, what, in the late '70s or mid '70s, I think. And now here we are at 2019, so that's 40 years or so. Is there anything like an industry standard that, well, a building like this needs to undergo a major renovation every 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years?
Yes, usually a building like this is designed for about a 50-year life expectancy. So you're right at the point where you would expect to do really a major renovation to extend its life on.
And kind of the same thing with the police department and everything across the street. I know I'm asking a question that's outside of this topic, but that
It's
kind
in
of
a
a building
similar
about that
situation.
too.
I've been in that building too. Yeah, it's in the same situation.
Yeah, okay.
Did you have something else, Bob?
Yeah, regarding council chambers, I don't really see we're doing much there, but I've noticed a lot of times when we have meetings in council chambers, it's kind of made for council on that end. And I wonder if we might incorporate something that, maybe another Diaz or something, that you could turn around like we did at the coffee talk the other day. Standing down there and have something there for people to put their notes on, and I don't know if there's been any discussion of that or not, but it might be something we might want to
Less
consider.
formal.
I think that would increase the flexibility of council chambers. I mean, I don't want to keep this as, you know, the sacristy of the city. I think we should like people to use it for public meetings. And right now, it's not very amenable to that in the current configuration of the front of the room.
And just so I'm clear on this room, would this room move then?
This room would,
How
yeah,
much,
be-
what would the size of this room be there versus what it is?
it's the same size.
Cause it's pretty small
It's tight.
for what we try to do in here.
And again, we do have those operable walls, so we could expand this into just one bigger meeting room, more of a training room is what the staff was requesting.
Some kind of foldable.
Yeah, like a Holiday Inn style operable wall that just moves out of the way.
So you can divide it up if you needed to,
Yep.
but the likelihood that we have something else going on at this time is pretty low. So,
But usually doing that every week, or every other week.
or just
Expanding it, shortening it, expanding
or
it.
just leave it expanded until
Exactly.
you needed it. Have the default option be the larger one. That would be
So,
good.
I guess my other point, if there is a true concern about reducing customer parking or maybe having less spaces, I'm not gonna speak for everybody, but I don't need a designated spot. I can just park in a visitor spot, even if I have to park on the next block and walk over. I'm here a couple times a week at the most. I guess my point would be, in order to, if we need to make up those customer spaces, I don't know why we would retain those spaces for one meeting a week when they could be customer parking at all times.
Yeah, the only time this is tough is on work session nights where there's still, employees are still here and we need to find a place.
Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman, I think you've got a legitimate, reasonable response in that regard. But I would tell you that with regard to the space that's available here, that you would effectively be giving up for the customer space, which would be located closer to the new front door, if you will. I don't think citizens will be losing
Okay.
space in comparison to what's available for them now on
Yeah.
the sidewalk over here, at the back of the
Mhm.
building, if you will. So the back of the building would effectively be converted to a council employee parking lot versus a customer employee parking lot, and all the customer parking would be right adjacent to this side of the building. And I think the space will be the same.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Would we have to reduce the number of spots we have for the state employees then? Because we guarantee them a certain number of employees, right?
Mr. Mayor, that's correct, and the likelihood of our, hopefully, right, Lyle, of our impeding on the space that they use now by the time that this project could potentially be completed, in concert with the completion of the state building, where those spaces would be needed for those employees, probably won't conflict. If it does, we will be sure to have an alternative plan to make sure we don't lose any citizen space and state employee space.
So, my mind is, we're looking at wanting to make this more secure. Then on top of it, we're looking at a new police station. On top of it, we're looking at a new fire station. That's a whole lot of bucks that's gonna be going out. I'm assuming it's not all looking at same within years. I guess which project exceeds the other projects of all three of those, because it sounds like each one is very important in every aspect. Each one is super important.
I would Mr. Mayor, I'll take a stab at that, Councilman, because that's a reasonable question. The timing of all this is simply, you know, my informal view, and obviously, as council views things differently, my job is to embrace your vision of how this priority and timing ought to look. So please be aware of that. Generally speaking, the issue for me is more along the lines of sources of funding to make these projects happen. Lyle kind of referenced very briefly, and you probably saw some discussion of this in the memo as well. My hope is that with the offloading of land assets that we're currently engaged in, coupled with the offloading of building assets, that I would like to recommend for you to consider at some point when we prepare that question a little better than we have tonight. That ostensibly those dollars would be enough, the aggregate value of those dollars would be enough to fund this project. And I am suggesting, you know, albeit informally right now, that those building assets that I'm referring to would be the city center building, and it would be the Ash Street building that our state employees are in right now. Obviously, that means that the state building project would have to be complete in order for that Ash Street building to be available for us to offer it to the private sector. There's a number of land assets that we've been talking about as well that you probably all recall and we're working on, as you well know. And so, you know, if everything worked even slightly right, I would hope that would generate enough dollars for the funding of this project. Now, as it relates to funding the police station, the reality is, I really believe we're going to have to consider an approach to the public for a specific purpose excise tax for that purpose. And as you all know, that means that we have to kind of work with the entire county to try to get projects put together and a proposal to the citizenry to make that happen that is inclusive of all the municipalities in our county. So the police station, albeit probably one of the larger aspects of that proposal, would only be a part of that proposal. And that's kind of the struggle that we deal with here in Wyoming as municipalities. Whenever we do one of those kinds of requests to the community, we have to do it in concert with all of the municipality entities that we have in our county, whether we're in Natrona County, whether we're Sweetwater County, whether we're Fremont County, whatever. And so I have a little more work to do in that regard before I can bring you a well-prepared proposal as far as it relates to that. With regard to a police station project, history has indicated that the 1% voters are supportive of using 1 cent dollars to build fire stations. I think the timing is such that that would fall in nicely with a 1 cent cycle following the one we're in currently to make that expansion or replacement of our current fire station 1 to work out as far as timing is concerned. It's not ideal at Fire Station 1 right now, but my hunch is that we can live with Fire Station 1 until we get to the point that 1 cent will be able to absorb the creation of that station. So again, that's sort of my informal view that I would probably follow in the form of a formal proposal to all of you. And so it's more of a preview, if you will. But that's something to start thinking about. And indeed, I think represents a relatively reasonable way to try to get all these projects done without necessarily beating each other out in terms of priority and funding.
And Carter, let's be sure in the legislative review to talk to people about that compromise or that proposal proposal looks like as far as the 5th cent, 6th cent, and even 7th cent options that would be available.
Absolutely.
Because that's already a matter of public record, that the presentation has been made to the revenue committee, and that both entities are behind it, which increases the likelihood that it would be received favorably. Did I see a hand?
And this question, Mr. Pitlick might have to answer this. So obviously, we're kind of getting into where we're talking about different funds and things of that nature. Because I know when we sell buildings, I'm going to forget the name of it, but I know it goes in that very specific fund that's for like property acquisition and sales. Is this an appropriate spend? I mean, as far as, let's say we are using property sales funds, what are those funds parameters, and does this fund allow us to do things like renovations of buildings, additions of buildings, things of that nature?
Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman, another great question. That question actually falls very much in line with regard to the financial policies discussion that we need to have as it relates to these pockets of dollars.
Yeah.
The reality is, I don't think we have a resolution or a well-documented policy statement that manages that what we call the revolving land fund.
Oh, that's right, okay.
Yeah. But even if we did, council certainly has the authority and the power to adjust that approach however you think is appropriate. As it relates now, with regard to what I know about whatever policy might exist about that fund, I don't think it's inconsistent in that, you know, you're effectively using land generated sort of revenue to deal with facility deficiencies, a part of which was developed through the sale of facilities. So the firehouse over at 15th is a good example of that, most recent example of that. So I would contend that that's not inconsistent, but that is a discussion we need to have, and I think it's very consistent with one of the phases of financial policies that Tom is preparing right now.
So,
Last question that I have. I really like this, and I like the design that's up there. I think we should just, if we're going to expand out, I think we should just expand up. I just, like I said, pay me now, pay me later, other way you're going to pay. But it seems like we went from making this more of a secure place to renovating the place with the security. I mean, when it was proposed to us, it was talked about, hey, we need to make this more secure. And that's what was proposed, but now it's kind of being, in my mind, proposed as, we don't want to just make it security, we want to renovate this as well. Is that what I guess is actually needed at this point in time? And I know what he mentioned about office space and crowded, and I saw it for myself. I'm just asking the question, I guess from a different side.
And again, I think, Mr. Mayor, Councilman, that's a reasonable question. There is no doubt, in my mind anyway, that a major impetus with regard to the concept that you see here is again trying to harden the building with regard to protecting both our employees and citizens as best we can. We can't guarantee anything, but we can do better, I think, than what we're doing now to prevent or maybe deter those type of active shooter events. That reconstruct of the facility is significant enough in my mind that it draws into the dialogue the question of, well, we're going to spend, you know, more than $1 million on that rework. Does it make sense to consider the ADA deficiencies that we have in the building? Does it make sense to consider some of the other major deficiencies that we have in dealing with 40-year-old infrastructure like HVAC, like fire suppression, and so on? And unfortunately, with the cost that those bring to the table, it does add to the overall value of the project to the point that we're looking at about $3 million. I completely understand the fact that 3 million compared to 1.5 or whatever that cost of the security aspect of the project is substantially different. But I would tell you, kind of going back to a former statement of yours, paying us now or paying it later is a really relevant question, because as you go into ADA adjustments in 10 years, as you go into dealing with HVAC issues in 10 years, I don't think it's going to get cheaper. And so with regard to what we're recommending, we think it makes sense to deal with those issues now. But it is not inappropriate for council to consider that and say, let's just deal with security now. And maybe in 5 years, we'll come back and talk about the remaining ADA issues we need to deal with, et cetera.
Ray?
Yeah, I just, the only thing I'd make a comment about is, I think Lyle said it, I think he said that we're approaching the life expectancy of the building. So it makes sense to dually work on the security, but it also work on renovation and moving forward for the next 50 years, or however long we need to work in this building. So I think it's kind of understandable that we're at this point. We need to take care of our properties and do that. Because I think if we don't do it, it's more expensive, and be able to renovate and start doing those things that we need. So it makes sense to do that all now.
Well, I'm gonna ask a question, I'll get you guys. So do you think when you look at these options as far as disposing of property or buildings, that there is a reasonable likelihood, Carter, that we could do this and it would be revenue neutral?
Mr. Mayor, Council, that is absolutely my goal. I would not want to have to dip into reserves, to have to siphon off sales tax operating revenue to make the balance of this project happen. I think it's feasible. I think it's reasonable to expect that. And it is my goal to not have to come back to you and double down on the words I'm sharing with you right now.
I don't know who was first. Steve, then Bob.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I concur with the approach that you want to take. I think that's a good plan. I really don't want to see the city get in the situation that some of the school districts did in the state of Wyoming. They simply ignored maintenance that needed to be done and remodels that needed to be done, and we ended up spending, $270 million in District Number 1 because we had done that for 40 years. I don't think we want to be there.
Steve?
Didn't I understand that we are already having maintenance issues with the HVAC system?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, you understood absolutely correct.
Okay, so that's another one of those things that our maintenance cost over the next few years could eat up part of this if it's in that situation. Okay.
I think
And something else along the lines of what you said just a minute ago, I'm sorry. We wind up talking about reserves, and we have, I don't know how you want to put it, but our savings accounts we call reserves. And there are a lot of people that see when it is said that we are spending, we're paying for this project from reserves, they don't understand that that's money, particularly in the enterprise funds, that that's actually money that we have saved up through the bills because we knew that was going to happen, and then we pay for it. And they think we're spending our true reserves, if you want to call them that. And so that's something that as we go forward with these things, we need to make sure that the public understands, because from when I was before and already now, well, you're spending reserves. Well, wait a minute. No, that's our savings account that we have saved up for through past. So I think that's something that we need to try to educate the public on as well.
And this is the first discussion of many that we are going to have about this proposal and how we're going to fund it. Thank you both for coming and walking us through this. I think we should probably move on now, and we'll talk later about how we would go ahead and finance this. I assume everyone's okay with us moving forward with this for now and figuring out a payment mechanism as we look at these properties. Is that
Yep.
okay? Everyone's okay? I guess I didn't see thumbs all the way around, but,
Thank you.
I have a lot of questions regarding it, so.
well, we're not
Yeah.
deciding
I
anything
think
now,
we'll do
but
it.
we are gonna say, let's keep moving forward with this and see where it goes.
Fair enough.
Okay, Golf Pro RFP.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, there've been a number of questions, actually previous to this council and including this council leading up to this point in time as it relates to the services out of the golf course, and more specifically as it relates to the Golf Pro directly. As many of you know, and you probably saw in the materials that we submitted to you over the weekend, we have had our relationship with our current Golf Pro since 1979. That's a 40-year build too, as a matter of fact. And some of the questions that I've gotten from the council, as well as some of the members of the public, is with regard to what that agreement constitutes. What exactly it is that we see in terms of revenue in all parts of the operation, and what that means in terms of the revenue that we receive as a part of that operation. And what exactly is the best business practice for us. The challenge that I see as it relates to our current arrangement is that the contract isn't necessarily designed with the ideas of transparency that many of you have espoused in most of our other relationships. And so for me, I'm not totally comfortable that we meet that bar in this arrangement. And so therefore, I am inclined to want to go out to the industry through a formal process and see what it is exactly we need to do in order to either improve what it is that we have going on right now, or at least bring into the sunlight our situation, our arrangement, and make that more defined over time if we should stick with Mr. Marsh. And I want to tell you, we shouldn't necessarily assume that an exercise of this nature means that we will necessarily be changing pros. At the end of the day, we might find, after we have a real clear understanding of the data and the analysis is there, that our situation is a good one, and we can arrange our agreement in such a way that we have more transparency introduced into the arrangement, as well as perhaps a better control as it relates to our own destiny for the customer service product that we want. So, having set that table, my recommendation is that we do take the steps to initiate a formal RFP, and as a part of that process, we entertain a conversation with our current pro and see what kind of proposal we can get there. But it would help if we could get your blessing with respect to the hallmarks that I've identified here with you tonight, and others that you would like to see as a feature of the RFP or as a feature of the arrangement that we might have moving into the future.
Questions, comments? Steve?
All right. So in discussions as far as transparency goes, can you explain some of the issues that we're having right now as far as not being so transparent, I guess is the best way to put it?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, absolutely. But I would prefer to defer to Mr. Cortez, if I could, to walk us through some of that detail. That's all right.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, I think that probably some of the specific things would be overall when I get asked the question, like what's the golf professional book of business, if you will. And when people ask me that, I don't really have an answer for them because I don't have enough parts of the equation to come up to a total number. What I can tell you is that like we issue a check currently, you know, that check ranges from about $105,000 about $108,000 per year. What I can't tell you is how much money is, say, derived off the driving range, because the golf pro in the current contract gets to retain all the earnings of that particular piece of the book. Furthermore, he doesn't have to tell us how much that particular piece of the book is worth because he retains all of those earnings. I could also say the same thing for other things like, say, the lockers that are located there at the golf shop. I could also say that for merchandising, for concessions, which is pretty minimal. I could say that for the handicapping system. There's probably about 4 or 5 elements that I just named that are probably driving at what you're getting at, which is what are the things we don't know, and those are the things that I don't know. So in totality, I can't tell you how much the book of business is worth. I can start at the 108, and then I got a lot of plus A, plus B, plus C, but I can't tell you what A, B, and C are worth. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so it'd be fair enough to say that there's a check that we pay to the golf pro, and that's that is based, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that's based off of a percentage of greens fees and a percentage of golf cart rentals. And then beyond that, we don't know because that's something he controls, and so we'll never know what those figures are. And in fact, if we even asked, he wouldn't have to tell us what those figures are. Okay.
Correct on all accounts.
And so I guess to follow up a question with you then is that's what we're trying to change is if we put it back out to bid, to change those things so that we actually know. The driving range is a good example. We would know exactly what that generates because nobody can tell us today how much money we're not making anything. The city's not making any revenue off of that. That's all going to Golf Pro, but how much that money actually is.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Friel, I think that's a pretty good synopsis of the struggle that I'm having, and the process that we take at this juncture is the process that I'm familiar with to get all of those details on the table and to move forward with a very, very clear understanding of what that means from now on.
And then if I could ask one more follow-up question to Tim, then and I don't know whether you'll know this or not, but is it other private courses per se, do they handle things the same way, or do they generally have a set wage, if you will, for a golf pro? And so whether it's a percentage of green fees or whatever it might be, is it common to just give away, so to speak, all the say the range, driving range itself? Is that a common thing to just give to them and not have accountability for it?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, I would say that the one answer to your question is it ranges, like we've done a lot of research on this over the past few months. It ranges like the whole gamut. So I mean, there probably are instances where there's structure just like what we currently have. However, I would say that through our research, the vast majority of it, even if they decide to give all of the proceeds from a particular piece of the book to the golf pro, they still know what that's worth. So they say like, hey, everything's got to be run through the register, and you have to provide a report annually or quarterly or something to that effect of what that is that they are giving to that person. So I do think it's pretty rare, at least from our research, to not have any knowledge of what it's worth and then to give the whole thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially, right now we have no clue what portions of that create, and I would think as a city we should probably know what we're generating and what we're.
We could be giving him $500,000 a year.
Absolutely.
And don't know it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I might bring up the fact that with the Amico Joint Powers Board, Amico Regional Joint Powers Board, we had set up a committee almost 2 years ago now before we changed contractors to run it. And it's pretty much hands-off. Our original contract was hands-off, but it was hands-off to our own detriment, quite honestly. The contractor we got is an outfit called Landscapes Unlimited out of Lincoln, Nebraska. And I think it would probably be good for you to sit down with Renee and our golf committee, the Three Crowns committee, and maybe even the folks from Landscapes Unlimited. From the 6 months we've been on board with those people, we have seen a lot of things change, and pretty much all of them for the better. So I guess, you know, it's a little early in our relationship, but quite honestly, I'm really impressed. As a board, we get revenue projections, we get what the revenues were last month. We get a full report every month on what that golf course does, plus what they're gonna do and what they're anticipating. And right now, it looks like our goal was to lose less money. And it looks to me like we're probably on a good course for that. So it might be good to include some of that. You know, I'm sure they'd be glad to talk to you. They manage, I don't know how many golf courses, but it's in the hundreds. And they're a darn impressive outfit. I mean, they have a guy in Lincoln, Nebraska that does nothing but figure out how to grow grass. And he comes and inspects this golf course. And he inspects the store, they inspect the restaurant. And they have a pretty high set of goals with good reporting.
I appreciate the fact that you're bringing this forward, Carter, and I think we should step back and take a look. I mean, Gary Marsh has been the municipal golf course for 40 years, and who knows where we'd be without him. He's cultivated these relationships with the user groups that people are just very supported and well treated by him. However, there is this sentence that you put in here that I think is very important, that you say customer service expectations would also be a component to ensure citizens are receiving the service they can expect. Because I think people have been treated variably, depending on who they are. And you do continue to hear complaints that if you're not part of that inner circle, you know, you're not going to receive the same treatment as the people that are part of it. I'm just being frank. And so I think whatever contract we put in place should have some evaluation component as far as customer satisfaction, and that there should be data collected not only from the people who are there every day, but the person who just happens to come there for the first time on Sunday. And we all know how difficult it is to deal with the public, and you're going to see a lot of obnoxious behavior. You're going to see people drink too much. You're going to see people who are rude to the other golfers. Those things are very difficult to manage, but anybody that runs a business knows that you have to go by the principle of the customer's always right. And people have to feel well treated if this facility is going to be successful. And so I just think that component has to be part of this, as well as the review of how the financing works and what happens with the range of money, et cetera. Other comments?
Thumbs up.
They counted me as one of the workers.
I'm good with the Carter's.
Good to proceed.
Appreciate it.
Okay, on to speed limits. Oh boy.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, as we understood it, the conversation tonight was to be kind of contingent upon the feedback that we received from the community, the collection of which has been going on for about a month at this point. We've had the portal up, and we've tried to forward the comments to you through the information packets and so forth, as we have received them, at least throughout the week that we've been collecting or whatever. So speed limits was a big part of that discussion. Running red lights was another part of that discussion that council wanted to tackle, at least starting tonight potentially, as well as other things like traffic calming and sort of ancillary elements of this larger conversation. So we do have a presentation here for you tonight, as you can see, from the police department as it relates to some of the data that we've been collecting and trying to get ready for this discussion. We've also put together a memo through Andrew's department that gives you some preliminary recommendations with regard to some of the larger portions of our community that have attracted public comment. So the chances are you're going to want to talk about those items as well as a host of others, and so we're open to whatever feedback and questions you have, but if it pleases the council, if I could turn some time to the chief and his team, that would be very helpful.
Thank you, Chief.
Mayor, Council, I appreciate the opportunity to respond back to some of the concerns that were expressed earlier by council. And we are excited to report back some of the statistics that we have. Thank you. That we prepared for you. This slideshow presentation, I just need to warn you, it contains a lot of information. I'm going to skip over a lot of slides. I intend to give it to you with the caveat that you understand that the police department has gone to great effort in our quarterly reports to the city council, and in particular this report to council. We have altered the way we do it. The police department has various sectors of geographic areas that we govern, and generally we run our reports that way. But we have now begun to produce these for with the data contained specifically for your wards. So when I give you this information, you'll be able to analyze what's going on in your ward so that you would have the understanding of what concerns you may have and feedback and advice for the police department to proceed. Just hit the space bar. Let's go to the next one for me. Just an overview of traffic crashes and problem areas. Essentially speaking, what I'm going to finish up with was anytime we have high speeds in intersection areas, that's going to equate to crashes. So if you see CY Avenue, the 12th Street and 13th Street corridors, and this is 2nd and 1st Street, and it goes without saying that those would be high. As an overall, specifically that, in particular as Councilman Bates asked of us to look into how many red light, the failure to yield at a red light accidents we've had. And so far, from August to August, so 12 contiguous months, ending on August 31st, of just a few weeks ago, we had 145 crashes were a direct result of the offending party ran a red light. There was an additional 44 that failed to stop at a stop sign. That's the data that was asked for. I'm trying to put that into perspective. Here I have beginning from 2016 through the current quarter in 2019. There's a statistical showing of what the police department is responding to, and what you'll see is all of our trends are trending upward. This is the total number of crashes. This is the property damage only. These are the injury crashes. I'm sorry. Yes, in the hit and runs and the injury crashes. Here recently, and beginning in 2019, we've had a significant increase, but overall we have this trending thing that is going up. It's indicative of more vehicles on our roadway. It's indicative of an improving economy. There's a lot of things that go into this. Again, just reinforcing that they're highly predictable. Where you think accidents would be, where you've come across accidents is where they're going to be. We got these CY Avenues, so you have Wyoming Boulevard here, the entrance to Walmart right there. As you proceed down CY Avenue, and then these main east-west corridors, that's where the concentration is going to be. And I'm trying to speak through this because I'll give you the data to analyze in your own individual wards. This is Ward 1. Concentrating more specifically on Ward 1. And it'll focus in for your particular wards. Next one, please. Next one. Now, this is one that council specifically wanted us to address. And this is a review of the data on 2nd Street where we've altered the speed limit. So if you look at the numbers here, and this is 2019 year to date, you'll see that we're fast approaching our year to date numbers compared to last year across the board. However, we're gaining a lot more in the injury accidents. And the total number of, so this data right here is a representation of March, when we began the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit, through September 24th. It's as close as I could get to the most current data, compared to the exact time frame last year without the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit. You'll see that we've actually had more crashes, and importantly, our injury crashes are up. Now, as we analyze that, you've got to be asking, hey, we tried to slow things down. So remember, higher speeds equates to more accidents. But as we've tried to analyze what the data is showing us, next slide, please. So this is the graph of total number of driver actions. So remember, 1/2 of them didn't do anything wrong. So that's this part. The next ones are the most common infractions. That's following too close, and failure to yield right away, and then improper turns. And we look at the reasonings, what's happening on those following too closely. You have two things that are happening. First of all, some of them are going 20 miles an hour, but as Andrew is going to report to you, that's not the speed that people anticipate they should be able to safely drive. So the ones that are traveling 20 miles an hour are being struck on the end by those that don't realize that they should be driving 20, and they're comfortable that the roadway design allows for them to go faster. The second aspect of that is when we have such a long stretch of 20 mile an hour, people, and I've gone down and watched it with my own eyes. People think it's slow enough, things are not moving very fast, and they start getting on their cellular devices. And so we have because of that longer area of reduced speed, you're getting the distracted driving, which manifests again in the failure to yield right away, and certainly that rear end accident from following too close. Thank you. Ward 2, and this define everything that's going on in your wards. Next one, please. Ward 3. You can see those overall pictures. There's a lot of crashes that happen all over the city. Next slide, please. Keep going. The DDAX is the program of the police department that's trying to address two things: crime and traffic safety. And so we are overlaying on top of the maps that you've just been seeing, which has all of the traffic crash data. We're overlaying on top of that some of the crime data, and we're coming up with essentially those same kind of things that we need to be concentrating on. CY Avenue, our main east-west corridor, McKinley, Beverly, those areas. And so DDAX is a fundamental way of us trying to determine where should we best deploy our police officers. The next thing that we were asked to do was to discuss with council the traffic calming. I'm trying to whip through this as fast as I can. This graph essentially says, although it's related to pedestrians, it's a reminder that speed equals harm. So anytime that if we get people that the impact speed increases, the likelihood of that being tragic and traumatic increases exponentially. So when it comes to traffic calming or changing driver behavior, we have three tools that we have available to us, and I'm absolutely pleased to report we have the wonderful working relationship with the city engineer, the traffic department, and in the engineering aspect of it, and working jointly together to figure out what's best for our community. The first one is education and outreach. That's why you've seen so much on the police department's social media platform this year about drinking and driving, about kids driving, going back to school, about our school zones. You're going to see a thing tonight out on driving in winter weather. We do as much as we can to educate the public on exactly why we're doing the things that we're doing, and why we're enforcing heavily in that intersection, and so forth and so on. Next one is engineering, and that's looking at the roadway designs and the ways to affect driver behavior through the engineering. And lastly is enforcement. Enforcement is an aspect that only gains compliance on a short-term basis. Enforcement is generally not the most efficient way to change driver behavior. It does have an impact. It does have a significant impact. Studies show that a verbal warning only, literally in some studies, gained only minutes of compliance versus an actual citation gained quite much more, and then a citation with a conviction and a sentence gained significant advantage in changing driver behavior. So the education and outreach is going to take a lot of different ways. You know, you see our speed trailers up there. We work on signage. You know, we've already shown that we're very fond of those radar signs that are permanent attached to the road. Those help. Environmental conditions, we've done public meetings. We're doing the public outreach right now. That education and community outreach takes a lot of fun. Enforcement, the police department is committed to informing people. Look, we're going to be at CY Avenue in Poplar, and we're going to be citing people for failing to yield the right of way when they're turning left in that intersection, because that is causing so many crashes. We want people to know, and when they go through there, we want them to actually see us have somebody pulled over so that they get that reinforcement of the education that we've been trying to get them to do. We want them actually thinking, boy, when I come to that intersection, no matter what, I'm going to make sure that I don't turn left in front on somebody, because I've seen so many people get enforcement here. Some cities have actually armed their citizens with our spare, outdated, uncalibrated radar guns, just to kind of help, you know, for the guy that says everybody's speeding on my residential street. We actually give them here's a radar gun that we cannot legally present testimony on in court, and they get to find out for themselves. It feels like they're speeding, but they're really not. And yes, 1 out of 40 was speeding, but the vast majority are not speeding. Engineering, and this I think is the crux of what you asked about the traffic calming methods. And for most traffic calming methods, the most effective thing we can do is engineering. There's 3 different ways of doing that. And that's the horizontal deflection. Anytime we make people move laterally, it tends to slow them down. So if you can picture, the chicanes are exactly what we did on 2nd Street in our downtown area, where we kind of have that serpentine gateways and parkings, or on-street parking kind of narrows down the field, and so people do no longer feel comfortable going high speeds, and so they tend to slow down. Traffic circles at intersections that are problematic statistically are proven to do a pretty good job for us. Vertical deflection, try to make people not go too fast, or speed bumps and tables, raised intersections and raised crosswalks, so that people actually there's a feel to it, and it causes them to see it, recognize it, and cause them to slow down. And then the road diets, the 3rd one that I think we've done a great job at. We, you know, by taking what is a wide roadway, narrowing it down, that it immediately sends the signal to the driver's brain, hey, this is changing, I need to slow down. Center islands do a great job of minimizing the occurrence of more injury accidents. And anytime we tend to choke, so as we enter into the sides, and so there's some of our roadways where at the intersections you'll notice there's kind of a cutout coming into the roadway. All of that impacts the driver's brain and slows things down. And then we'll skip that. So thank you. I think, you know, Andrew's going to present some information to you on the recommendations that we have for you today. And the main message that I've tried to whip through is we're trying to be responsive to council. We'll give you the data for you to understand what's happening in your wards. We would just want you to provide feedback to us as you analyze that data. If you have questions, don't hesitate to contact us. As your constituents provide you with feedback, please pass that on to us so that we can continue to make Casper a safe place on which we can travel on our roadways. I would then ask for any questions.
Questions for Chief? Steve? I do have a question. When you were talking about 2nd Street and being taken down to a 20-mile-an-hour zone, and the numbers have gone up, What was that time frame that you ran that for? Was it for a full year
No,
or just the time frame?
It was March to September.
Mayor, council, that, you know, we haven't had, you know, we fully will admit that we haven't had, there's not been sufficient time for us to really change and analyze driver behavior, but we ran those numbers from the date of implementation right up until the day we ran it, which happened to be September 24th. Then we compared it directly to the same time period last year.
Mike?
I don't suppose that you have any numbers about if the overall traffic count on Second Street, for instance, has gone up, down, or stayed the same. You said that the collisions, I think you said there are more collisions. Does that correlate to the higher traffic count on there, or is the traffic count staying the same?
Mayor, Councilman, that's
If
an
you don't
excellent
know.
question. This is my personal opinion. Traffic volume is increasing. We do run numbers. We do, you know, in conjunction with streets, we do get a feel for how much our intersections are being used. You see those counters all the time when you're driving. Those are the lines across the roadway. And perhaps Andrew can follow up, but I don't think we came prepared to answer that tonight.
Okay, no, that's fair.
Any other questions for Chief before Andrew? Thank you, Chief.
Mr. Mayor, Council, in response to some earlier conversations we've had with Council, we looked at 3 specific sites. One being Second Street, which was hot in the press and hot with the community about the speed limit change from Park Street, essentially all the way to Conwell Street, from 30 to 20. We did a speed study prior to implementation between McKinley Street and Conwell Street, and that 85th percentile, which is what we kind of zero in on, as that's what the majority of the public feels is reasonable and comfortable for them to travel at. That 85th percentile was 34 miles per hour between Conwell and McKinley. Now keep in mind that the speed limit change recommendation was due to the number of accidents at the intersection of Conwell and Second and Conwell and Jack. It was not to do with the speed necessarily of the traveling public. So the recommendation was to reduce that speed to 20 miles per hour just because of the number of accidents. We don't have any speed data prior to the implementation of the 20 miles per hour between Park Street and McKinley Street. I can tell you right now, with post-implementation, this 85th percentile between Conwell and McKinley has dropped from 34 down to 28. I'd call that a marginal success, 6 miles per hour. It's then coming back up to 30 miles per hour between McKinley Street and Park Street. It is clear, and I think the speed sentries that we have up right there around the hospital are, oh, it really is 20 miles per hour. And I think that is causing some of them to slow down. We also have a traffic median, a traffic island, which you just heard the chief. That narrowing of the road, that feeling of constriction does cause traffic to slow down naturally. The recommendation is to maintain the 20 miles per hour just in front of this hospital, but then relax it to 30 miles per hour between Park Street and McKinley Street. That is the tendency of traffic to want to travel anyway. I know Chief's gotten some data, and I would echo, 6 months is not enough for us to determine if the reduction of speed has been successful or not in front of the hospital. But so the recommendation you have in front of you is to maintain the 20 miles per hour in front of the hospital, relax it back to 30 between McKinley Street and the downtown. And then Councilman Huber, I think specifically you mentioned 13th Street and perhaps King Boulevard. We also got
Carter.
I have followed the city manager on King Boulevard, and I'm not sure he follows the speed limit, but
It's on the record.
Much slower, right?
but keep in mind that the default speed limit in this community is 30 miles per hour. So unless it's posted otherwise, it is 30 miles per hour in this community. That's the same with King Boulevard. We looked at King Boulevard. We also looked at 13th Street, essentially west of where King Boulevard ties in to 13th Street. So we actually got speed data 13th and Maple, which is just west, just east of 13th Street ball fields. Now, the 85th percentile on King Boulevard is posted at 30, is 40. the traveling public is already going 40 miles per hour on King Boulevard. And I'm not sure if I traveled that stretch of road where they had their speed sensors out, but I may have been one of those traveling at 40. I think it'd be safe to say you could raise that to 40 miles per hour and you would see no change. So the recommendation is, if you want to do something, you can raise King Boulevard from 30 to 40 miles per hour quite successfully. Now the other one, at 13th and Maple, the 85th percentile there is 34 miles per hour. Keep in mind, it is posted at 30, so people will slow down and try to obey the law. They don't do it on King Boulevard, regardless of what we got. I am recommending that stay at 30 miles per hour simply because we've got a mid-block crossing right there at 13th Street Ball Fields to get to the Three Crowns trail system, if you will. There's a fair amount of pedestrian traffic that you may or may not recognize, but there are people that park on that parking lot and cross the street using that mid-block crossing. So that is a very quick rundown of the memo you have in front of you, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Steve, then Mike.
So two things. First of all, 21st by Fun Valley Park. I know
Yes.
they put in a stop sign down at Nottingham, and I'm assuming that was to stop the speedway down through there, but it seems it still hasn't done the job. Is there a possibility between Nottingham and Wyoming Boulevard, like at the park itself, towards the bottom of the hill? You talk about doing speed tables and things like that. Is that a possibility to reduce the speed up there? Or?
I'm hearing two concerns there. I'm hearing people are just blowing through the stop sign. They don't even recognize it's there. So I haven't seen any indicate that to me personally yet.
I have.
Have you?
Yeah.
Well, we put stop bars in the pavement to try and help visually tell people that, hey, there's a stop sign here. We may have to put in some LED lights on the stop sign itself, just to even more visually advise people that, hey, we're coming up on the stop sign, you need to stop. We could put in a race crosswalk, much like we've got along the Rails to Trails corridor that you see downtown, and that was done as part of the traffic calming measure. If you get struck by a vehicle at 30, your success rate of living is marginal compared if you get hit by a vehicle traveling at 20. I mean, so.
And I think where the biggest concern is coming off of Wyoming Boulevard, coming down the hill itself, and you have that traffic going across too, pedestrian traffic going
Right.
into the park itself, and so they gain a lot of speed coming down that hill. And so I'm just looking at your suggestions up there as far as the speed table, and I think that might at least slow that traffic coming down the hill.
Yeah, Mayor, I wouldn't, I guess it would be a speed table. Yeah. I'm hesitant to put in speed bumps, which are those very abrupt, they wreak havoc on not only your cars, but also our snowplows.
Makes sense.
Mike, you were waiting.
When you did these speed studies, was that those average speeds or whatever, were they going both directions or just one direction or something?
They're
I know
bi-directional.
just anecdotally driving on 2nd Street, everybody wants to go fast going downhill, and to me they go slow going uphill. But
It was bi-directional, east and
both
west.
directions,
Yes.
Bob, or Steve, sorry.
Instead of the speed tables, I call them rumble strips, where they cut the grooves in the pavement. Do those seem to do any good? And would that be something that, like at the top of your hill that you're talking about, because I know where you're talking about when you drop down that hill, put a couple of sets of those along that incline, because you got kids playing in that park as well, and you don't need the people whipping down that hill, and I didn't know if those would help and be easier on the plows and stuff as well.
Mr. Mayor, Council, you typically see those on higher speed roadways, especially on long stretches of highway where all of a sudden now you're coming up to an intersection. It's nothing that we've tried in this community before, and I'm not aware of a lot of municipalities trying that, but it's not a bad idea. It'll at least alert them that you're approaching
Yeah. Well,
a stop condition. I mean,
how would you like, should we look at each one of these in turn and see how council feels about the recommendation? Would that make sense? We're really making 3 separate recommendations, one on Second Street, one on King, and one on 13th.
I am.
Is that correct, Andrew?
That's correct.
People, why don't we just do them one at a time and see how do people feel about going back to the 30 miles per hour between Park and McKinley? Steve?
So I'll take responsibility for Second Street because I made that. And my whole purpose behind it was I just didn't think that it was very wise to go from a 20 to a 30 and back to a 20 because then we just create a potential of a speed trap, if you will. It's not really that, but it just fluctuating in speed. However, since I had asked you, Andrew, at the very last reading of that, whether or not it was a good idea. You said it wasn't, and now I see that it wasn't. But I would go with the recommendation. I think it still needs to stay 20 from Conwell to McKinley. But then after that, I think it needs to go back up to 30. And part of the reason behind it is, and I've done it myself, is I just don't want to drive 20. So I drive over to First Street and I take First Street down because I can actually drive at a normal speed and not read a book or do whatever.
Mike, Steve.
I hate to argue with my learned companion here, but I thought that Second Street was my fault. But
You can take it.
But I'm still, I don't like this.
They got big shoulders.
Andrew, your term was the yo-yo speed thing. I don't like doing that, because to me that just smacks of a speed trap and all that, and it still seems to me, and I understand the unpopularity of that 20-mile-an-hour speed limit. I understand that, the idea that, general traffic is moving at that speed. But I'm just troubled by that you go from 20 to 30 to 20, that to me is the classic definition of a speed trap. And I'd say if it's, I'd prefer to go back to 30 the whole way.
Steve?
Well, mine is a little bit along that line. What I'm interested in, and I thought one of the public comments was a very astute comment, because part of it as well was the hospital employees crossing between the northeast corner and the southwest corner of that intersection, and they made mention about an all cross, which they have a lot of those in some other cities, where basically it's a 4-way red stop, no right turns, no nothing, and then the public gets free use of the intersection, so the hospital people could even cut diagonally across versus having to do a double cross. And when that comes on, you actually put up, and I've seen them, I hate to use it, God, Jackson even has some of them, to where when it's a no right turn, they actually have a sign that comes up, that big right turn circle X. You put that up, you do all of those things for the pedestrian crossings, and literally go back to Mike's idea of the 30 mile an hour all the way through there, because, but as a counter to Mike's point, we have school zones that are 20 mile an hour, and people obey them. You could do the same thing, but I would be in favor of the 30 as well.
I mean, ultimately, if the point of reducing the speed was to hopefully reduce accidents, and we're not seeing that, then I guess I don't understand why we'd keep it at 20. Obviously, I was a proponent for it being slower in front of a hospital anyways. I mean, you do have hospital staff, you have families and children visiting their loved ones. Like, it is a very natural area to not have cars racing and speeding by. You have ambulances entering the street that need to get where they need to get in a hurry. But if it's not reducing accidents, then this isn't the answer. I mean, something else is the answer, and I don't know what that is, but I don't think it's reducing the speed.
Ken?
I agree with, I think it should be moved to Kimball, in all honesty, from McKinley to Kimball. I know that's not very much, but I just feel at that stoplight, you hit that stoplight, it goes to 20. I do believe that it should stay 20 around the hospital, from McKinley to Conwell. As they said, we haven't really had enough time to see if that it's gone up, but I mean, to really see how it would work, especially switching it back to 20 or keeping that at 20 and the rest 30. So I'm all in favor from actually McKinley to Kimball at the stop light being 30 miles an hour.
Okay, let's see, Mike and then Steve.
I'm trying to figure out how to ask this, because when we reduce that to 20, and then it seems to me like I remember some conversation about that, well, a good many of the collisions that along there in front of the hospital that could be attributed to speed were at speeds that were substantially greater than 30. And, you know, do you, Andrew, or I guess the chief's hiding back there too, do you guys have any feeling or any information about, you know, that has this decrease in the speed limit there actually had any effect on collisions, or is it, are we able to tell, or is it just because there's more traffic going along there are more collisions, and so that variable makes that impossible, if not hard to predict? I don't know if I'm asking. Can you understand what I'm asking, even though I'm not asking it very good?
So, Mayor, Councilman, if I can try to take a stab at this. In my data, contained within my data, are anomalies that have nothing to do with the we've had a couple of high-speed street racing events, things of that nature. That, one person that was not even remotely thinking about traveling the speed limit, that rolled their vehicle right there. Those have nothing to do with the speed limit. Those were anomalies. Those are very hard for us to predict and to prevent. People that are willing to drive 100 miles an hour on 2nd Street, short of very strict enforcement, I just can't impact those. Contained within my data is a couple of those outliers. As you saw from the data, and I apologize for rushing so quickly through it, following too closely, failure to yield. But that can be said for virtually all of CY Boulevard, that can be said for a lot of them. So that 20 mile an hour impact the impact of the 20 mile an hour zone has provided a venue for some people to be lawful, and those that are feeling the 85th percentile, I feel like I can drive 30 on this roadway. That's a conflict right there. And that manifests in this data. So ignore the ones that are the high-speed ones. Those are anomalies.
Well, I lost track here. Oh, somebody else waiting?
I think Steve was next.
Steve. And then Bob.
I guess to you, Andrew, and more so to what Ken just asked, is there a purpose for the 20 mile an hour? It had always started at Park before we changed it. Would it make a big difference by moving it one block to Kimball, or is there a purpose behind starting it at Park?
Mayor, council, keep in mind that 30 miles per hour is specified by ordinance as a default. But you've also, by ordinance, identified the downtown as 20 miles per hour. And that includes to Park Street right now. So that is why you see it to Park Street right now and not to Kimball. Would you see an appreciable difference if you go change that ordinance from Park to Kimball? I don't think you will personally, because I mean you've got a signal there anyway, and people are probably beginning to get up to speed to get to Park regardless. But that's why it's at 20 miles per hour right now.
But essentially, by moving it a block, we're changing it from the downtown area.
You're changing it from the downtown, core downtown. From
It's not going to make that big of a difference.
But that's why it's established right now, is at 20.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I tend to agree with the recommendation by engineering. We do have a lot of school zones around town. People learn them, and maybe I'm just like Pavlov's dog. I don't know, but I have learned to go 20 miles an hour when I take a right going to the east or coming from the west, vice versa. So I think it's working, and I think it's really early to say that people aren't being trained, because I see, the first few days we did it, people were honking at me. Well, they're not doing that anymore.
So you're arguing to stay 20 or you're
No, to
arguing
do just what they recommend,
Okay.
just what engineering has recommended.
Sean?
I think this is a little bit different than the school zone. The school zone is only certain hours in the day, and there's flashing yellow lights telling you 20 miles an hour. So I'm with Steve, Kathy, and Councilman Huber on changing it all back to 30.
Not have the hospital zone. Kristen?
The only other thing I'd say is I think Steve Cathy's actually onto a really good point. Hospitals have shifts, and when those shift changes do happen, there is an enormous amount of pedestrian traffic. And so by doing the 4A red stop, especially at shift change, which is only twice a day, you would potentially alleviate any pedestrian-related accidents. Just because, I mean, the majority of those hospital staff are probably coming in and out right around those shift changes.
Is that feasible, Andrew?
Mayor, Council, it is. We don't tend to see the all pedestrian walk in these types of intersections. You see them at universities.
Yep.
You see them at high tourist areas, hence Jackson.
Yep.
You generally don't see it at these types of intersections. Because generally, I understand they have shifts, but it's generally not the mass of pedestrian traffic that you would typically use an all-stop situation for.
Ken?
Yeah, Cheyenne used to do that on 16th and Central or they don't know.
I would be curious of the amount of accidents during those shift change, if any of those pedestrians being hit was during that shift change. That'd be something I'd be curious to find out. But is it possible to do more of like what's on Center Street crossing for the new courthouse, that when the light turns and you can walk across, that it lights up the walkway as you're driving up, it lights it up? Because I know that when I'm coming down the center and somebody pushes that button and comes across, not only do I see the stop sign, but when I see the lights flashing across the road, that makes me even more aware that, hey, people can. Would that be more feasible to put in there?
Mayor, Council, they actually have one on Conwell Street between 2nd Street and 3rd Street, if you see it, right just south of the ambulance garage. They've got something very similar. We don't tend to put that where there's already a signal and they have a green walkman for them to cross already. You see them at mid-block type of crossings, which is why you see it on Center Street by the courthouse, and you see it further south on Center Street at the Rails to Trails crossing, and you see it by the hospital.
Okay, a couple more comments and then we're gonna have to decide. Steve?
The only thing I would add to it is that, yeah, you have shift change, you have ambulance, but let's not forget we also maybe have people with a broken leg, or, you know, people, it's gonna take them time to get across the street. That's why I'm good with the 20 mile an hour at the hospital. It makes sense. Some people are just not gonna move as fast in that area.
Ray?
Yeah, I would support 30 all the way. That's all I'll say on that.
So we have, Andrew's proposal is that we keep the hospital zone at 20 miles an hour, move back to 30, and then of course keep the downtown at 20. And then the alternative is to move I guess there's two alternatives. One is keep it the way it is, which is 20 all the way down. I don't hear anybody saying that. And then the other is to just move it all to 30 and maybe try to improve safety at the Conwell and second intersection. How many people want to go with Andrew's proposal that we go 20, 30, 20?
Me and the hospital staff.
3. How many people want to go 30 all the way? 30 all the way wins. So I guess could you come back with maybe some proposals for how to make that the safest possible intersection that we can if we're going to have 30 miles an hour all the way through there?
I will.
All 30 miles all the way to Park, basically, is what you're saying.
Yes.
Okay.
Along that lines, I appreciate Kristen mentioning about the shift changes, but I've been there at that intersection, and I see a lot of the staff throughout the work day, and I don't know what happens at midnight, because I don't think the other, I don't think the other building is open in the middle of the night. But basically, you have a lot of people crossing from the administrative building to the hospital in the 8 to 5 hours. That's why, and on those cold, blustery 20-degree days, it would be nice for an all-walk to be able to cut that instead of having to wait twice. And
Andrew's gonna look at that possibility.
Yeah,
But let's,
if
let's
you
move
would.
on, because we already voted on this, okay?
Sounds good.
So, or, yeah, you don't vote in here. We all gave our preferences. Okay, so, the second item would be King Boulevard. How many people are okay with moving up to 40 miles an hour on King Boulevard? Opposed? 45. Okay. All right, so that was simple. And then your recommendation is that we stay at 30 miles an hour on 13th Street. Does anybody want to make a case for changing that? Is everybody okay with that? Okay, now, I know we received comments about other areas that we didn't discuss this evening. Were there any that made a persuasive case for you at all, Andrew, that we discussed them any further?
Oh, Mayor, Council, I read a lot of them. I don't know if I've seen all of them. Most of them were devoted to Second Street and the hospital, from what I can remember.
But we did make it open to any area people were concerned about.
I know I remember one on Metro Road. They were concerned about the speed limit on there being 30. They suggested that maybe that go to 40. We have not looked at any speeds on that stretch of road at all. That's one road that we could perhaps take a look at. That is the only other section of road that jumps out to me right now.
And then we had some concerns of the citizens on Green Meadow, but they didn't register in on this portal then. That they thought they had excessive speeding on that short stretch that was dangerous for the kids. And we did our own study on that, and it seemed as though people were following the speed limit more or less. Is that correct?
Mayor, Council, generally, when people are walking and they see a car go by, it's always speeding. In reality, it generally is not. So.
All right. Steve?
I would definitely recommend we, as Andrew mentioned, look at Metro Road, because that is one that, yeah, it's 30 mile an hour, and there's really, outside of Metro Animal Control and the fire training, there is nothing else on that road. And
Doubt that.
yeah, up that to either at least 35, if not 40. And to take a look at that.
Could we keep 21st on the list to look at?
Yes.
Could I get some lights to show your ET between 5th and 6th Street on Beach? Like drag racing lights, you can get a good ET on, I'm kidding.
So I think we probably should respond to the Green Meadow people that sent all those emails that we did look at it and there really was no evidence of speeding, because I don't know the results of that study were actually provided to the. Are we, anything else on speed limits, Ken?
This is just a recommendation that people have mentioned. I didn't send it in or anything because I wanted to get what your guys' thoughts were about moving some residential parks around it to 20 miles an hour. Now I know some of them, like that's on First Street, right by the hospital, even that 30, but some of them that are more in residential areas that take their kids across and play at the park and come across, looking at moving some of those down to just the park, just that section, unless it's a main road, to 20 miles an hour for their safety, for their kids, for them. Bicyclists, a lot of times are by the parks. Just bring it down to 20. That was thrown at me several times, so I thought I'd ask what anybody else's opinion would be on that.
Well, I'd kind of like to piggyback a little bit on what Councilman Bates is asking here. You know, at Mike Cedar and the college playing fields, when they're doing the midget football and that kind of stuff, and on Poplar and those that becomes very congested. I wonder if there's some efficacy to, some kind of signage, or, and I don't know if something just as simple as, putting one of those little kids playing signs in the middle of the road, or something like that. I don't know if there'd be, because when like on College Drive especially, and Mike Cedar, when those activities are going on there, and there's cars parked on both sides of the road, that really, to me, is an area that should be knocked down and slowed down some. But I don't know how you do that, because those are sort of like special event things. 'Cause I don't know.
Certain times of the day.
And I think that's kind of the same thing that sort of that Councilman Bates is asking about.
Did we see any accident trends there, or in the area that Ken's talking about?
Mayor, council, it's very hard for us to take a global look at this community and identify a cause, some kind of causal effect. We haven't seen an increase necessarily at parks accident-wise, and it doesn't seem to exist.
It was just brought up, schools with all the kids moving and playing and stuff, and I know school's getting out, so you got thousands of kids running in the school. It's 20 miles an hour. It was just brought up, if we can make the sum of the city and residential, get people slow down to 20. But council's not for it then.
Anybody else wanna speak in favor of that, or? Okay. All right, anything else, Andrew, that you wanna tell us about all this? You got direction on those 3 items at least.
Mayor, council, I think I've got enough information.
And that really covers the lion's share of the public input that we received. Okay.
Mr. Mayor, Council, if memory serves me correctly, and Andrew, I guess I'm posing this question to you, didn't we alter the speed limits around the entire circumference of the hospital, not just on Second?
Mayor, council, we made the entire campus essentially around the medical center 20 miles per hour.
I'm okay with leaving them that way.
I'm sorry?
Sorry, I'm okay with leaving them that way. Those are more residential side streets than a main thoroughfare.
Leave those at 20?
Yeah. I would agree.
Everybody okay with that? Okay, I see a lot of heads nodding, okay, all right. Thanks for sharing that
You
out.
bet.
Anything else on streets and speed limits? Steve and then Casper.
The one thing, though, you need to go on Conwell as you're heading south. Just past the hospital, on the telephone pole is a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit sign hidden behind that tree that needs trimming. So somebody needs to go trim that tree.
Call Andrew.
Yeah, you gotta be a licensed arborist now, so let's.
Only if it's aerial. Go ahead, Ken.
So, I also brought up, I'm the one that kind of brought up the red light runners, and obviously it has gone up, the accidents from it, and that's what my biggest concern was the amount of accidents that has taken place, the amount of people that, innocent, not innocent, that has been hurt by it, has increased a bunch. So I guess what reason for bringing that up is if council had any thoughts of how we can help prevent it, or any thoughts of what needs to be done to make it for it not to be as much. One was the inconsistency, and this would come down to, I guess, the streets, is on some lights you come up and you got the countdown to 10, then it changes to yellow, then it turns to red. And people know once it gets to that 3, 2, 1, it's either a 3, 2, 1, speed up and get through it, or it's 3, 2, 1, I better slow down because I know. But then there's some that count down to 10, then it has a red flashing, it's still green, and then it changes to yellow, then red immediately. There's not a real significant pause. I guess my question for that, it's 2 questions. Is there a way to make more of the all the lights the same. They're yellow, the amount of yellow time that it's up there is the same. When it's counting down, if it changes yellow at 5, all of them do. Is there a way to, I don't know if that'll help, I'm just throwing it out there. But the amount of accidents have really affected me, I felt, for me.
People can comment on that, Andrew?
Mayor, Council, we can certainly do that on the city signals, and I think we generally have. We don't control the whiteout signals, though. And keep in mind, that's all of CY, that's all of First Street, that's all of Wine Boulevard, Poplar.
So all of CY?
All the way from CY all the way to Poplar Street is all whiteout.
Okay, but from Poplar to
Poplar
into 9th, so
Correct.
when it changes to 9th, that's city, right?
That's correct.
So if you take that and you watch the countdown, I guarantee you, the countdown gets to 1, the red hand comes up, and it's still green, and then it switches from yellow to red.
We can certainly take a look
Just
at the timing
saying,
of those.
I know that's one.
You're talking about the amber time.
Right.
Right. We can take a look at that. And that can absolutely be adjusted.
I've noticed too, like especially like, you know, like if we've had a late meeting or something and I'm headed home, I wonder if it has something to do with the sensors on those lights that have the sensors, because I think with some of them what I've noticed is it might have that like preset countdown of like whatever 10 seconds, and then you know it gets down there but it hasn't sensed any other traffic, and so yes, it's changed to a red hand because the preset countdown has gone, but it's not going to change the signal for traffic because there's no other traffic coming like on those side streets. Once again, I don't know what I'm talking about, but I've noticed like at night when there's not a lot of traffic, that seems to kind of be what's happening.
Mayor, and you're right, the signals won't change if there's no demand on the lower leg of the intersection, if you will.
One more comment, Nelson, let's move on.
This was just a question, but to deal with the yellow, if I recall right from 40 years ago in traffic engineering, that yellow light is supposed to be a reasonable stop time if you're doing the speed limit when it turns yellow. Is that a...
Mayor, Council, that could have been the talk of the day. Now, now I think it is, speed up. Is what majority of traffic thinks like.
I share your concern about the red lights, and I don't know what else we can do about that.
Make 'em
That's a
redder.
lot of,
Make 'em
it's a
redder.
lot of accidents, but it, you know.
You allow the people with big trucks with big bumpers to run over the red light runners.
I see. All right, let's move on. Okay, thank you for all your work, Chief.
Yes, thank you.
Wyoming Senior Olympics. I was approached by the Senior Olympics group to see if Casper would be interested in hosting in 2021 and 2022. And so there is an application process, it has been in Cheyenne for the past 2 years, and the 2 years prior to that, I believe it was in Laramie.
I think it was Sheridan.
I
It
think
might have been
Sheridan.
it might have been
I think it was
Laramie.
Laramie, and then it was Sheridan before that.
Yeah.
And of course it's a positive event, brings a lot of people to town. I did ask, well, what is the city asked to do? And basically the major ask is for in-kind services. And staff gets involved in providing a lot of the organizational work. There's a lot of volunteers that have to be recruited for the various venues. And then, of course, city facilities. And so I believe the way it works is if the city is a sponsor, then the facilities are offered as part of that sponsorship. Is that not correct, Carter?
Mr. Mayor, that's what I understood. Yeah.
So there wouldn't be an ask to the city as far as community promotions or any demand for them to pay for 50% because the city would essentially be the sponsor. So any comments, concerns, questions about moving forward with sponsorship?
So, when it was
I can
before it
pass
started
this
moving
around.
city to city, I would volunteer every year when it was in Casper, and I think it's one of those things of you'd be amazed how many people this really does bring. Whether it's competitors, but then their grandchildren come to watch them, and their kids come to watch them, and they obviously aren't from here, so they have to stay somewhere, and it, at least it used to have just like enormous amount of sports, tennis, basketball, swimming, golf, I mean like every sport that you can think of. Pickleball.
Pickleball's big.
So, I mean, I don't know like previous year's numbers, but I know the years that I volunteered when it was in Casper, it seemed to have a pretty good community draw.
Carter, any concerns about demands on staff or what this would require of us?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I would like to do a little more due diligence as it relates to what exactly would be involved, but generally speaking, these kinds of events are good for the community and good for the local business community, and it is very, very likely that my recommendation would still be to try to support this as much as possible.
We'll need to be in contact with them because technically the application deadline is passed. It's okay. They would very much like to have it in Casper.
Oh, okay.
And so I said, all I could say was, I think we'll receive a positive response from the council as long as the demands on the city are reasonable. And if we've done it before, we should have a lot of previous information about how to do it and what's involved and things on servers that we can reprint without recreating everything, I would think. And Carolyn, I know, was very much involved with that back when Casper hosted it. So, and you haven't spoken with her about this?
No, sir.
Okay. Well, is everyone okay with Carter doing a little more research on all of this to see what it would involve? Okay.
Great.
All right.
Will do.
Cool. All right. Cool. Let's go on to agenda setting for 4 weeks from today, since we have our schedule set for 2 weeks from today.
Potential, there's some potential, because the Army comes to me for 3 years now. That'll be done November 5th, 12th, 19th meetings.
Okay. So, we're looking at, oops, I just have an older version of this, so I don't have the exact date, but it would be November, what? 12. Yep. So do we have, do we have some staff recommendation items?
Yes, sir.
Oh, you do, okay, go ahead, go to show.
No, it's okay.
Okay. Well, that's a fair amount.
Yeah, that does it.
Yeah. Mr. Mayor, probably the biggest item of concern would be the legislative agenda. Not that the other items aren't important and those kinds of things, but indeed that would fit real nicely with regard to getting direction and so forth pertaining to potentially an official ask, if you will, to the legislative delegation as they start their session soon thereafter.
And Kenna, you've been interested in having us set aside some time for dog parks. Would that be something we could do then the 6 weeks from today? Would you folks be prepared to talk about some possible options then?
For the 26th?
Yes.
Sure, absolutely.
Well, why don't we tentatively think about that now, because that's the only other item that anyone has brought up of concern that they wanted to get to. So is there anything else people want to get to that is on that list?
Whenever the David Tree Station 501c3, whenever they're ready to present that to us, I'll have an enormous amount of questions. But I'm assuming that they will approach us when they are ready.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
People feel like the highlighted items are enough for 4 weeks from today? Okay,
Oh, yeah.
I sent you all an email about the property tax issue, and so we'll just defer any discussion of whether we're going to discuss that for 2 weeks from today, and see if there's an appetite to even consider it. But I did.
I'd be glad to discuss it further.
So, well, we'd have to put it on our agenda. So, but we're not going to do that 4 weeks from today unless people want to. Let's not do that because we want to be sure that we can do the legislative agenda justice.
I'm sorry. My recommendation would be to drop it now.
Yes, I know.
I'll second that.
So, we'll, So, let's just not deal with that until we have time to even consider adding it.
Yep.
Okay, so, I think we're set. Legislative review, and then I have a few things I'm gonna pass around while we're doing the last part of our meeting here. A newsletter from the Youth Empowerment Council, and then minutes from the Disability Council. I don't know where that, is that in the packet? I don't know what those were in the packet. And then, thank you for the way. Okay. Anything on legislative review that we need to talk about? We continue to work with our delegation on the build grant, and that process is moving forward. And there's nothing new to report. We remain hopeful. Do you want to talk a little bit about the aerospace conference? Were you there yesterday?
Mr. Mayor, I was not there yesterday, but I could certainly address some of it.
Well, I did go. Go ahead.
Councilman
there,
Hawkins
Bob?
was there, yeah.
Okay.
Very well attended. I went to yesterday's sessions, and I didn't really count heads, but I'm guessing there were close to 200 people there.
Oh, they had 140.
How much?
140.
Oh, thank you. Well, anyway, it was very well attended, and several of the sections were not quite what they'd anticipated due to some schedule changes, but there was a couple places. There was addresses and email spots to go after those kind of contracts, and people were busily writing that stuff down. I didn't make the morning session, so, but I was pleased with the attendance.
So I don't know that we talked about what this was. I assume everyone knows this was a CADA-driven event where essentially all of the Minuteman silos have to be rebuilt, and there's going to be a lot of contractor work. And Wyoming has essentially not been a part of that process because we just didn't, they were connected with the military folks that write those contracts. And so this was a conference to help that happen, and also to learn a little bit about the Space Defense Program. Was there somebody there from Space Defense?
Oh, yeah, there was a guy from NASA, several folks from Cheyenne, and there was, well, I don't remember the names, but yeah, there were. And I also wanted to point out that this is put together between Forward Casper and Forward Sheridan, being CADA and Forward Sheridan. And Sheridan's been really active in this, and the truth is, with our airport and the number of things we can do from a mechanical standpoint, machining standpoint, there might be a real market for it. But there's so much ground at that airport that could be used for what's known as MRI, or MR program, maintenance programs for airplanes. And we just have a lot of ground and a lot of facilities, and a very, very good airstrip, 2 of them. I think it might be the longest one in the state, so.
And Congresswoman Cheney played a very significant role in getting the military brass to this conference. So she did.
Pretty impressive folks.
She did great service to the state and to Casper. So anything else we want to say about this? Did you want to add to that?
Other than to say it's the first of its kind, of that kind of gathering in Wyoming, and hats off to those organizers who made it happen, including Representative Chan.
You know, our local economic development group gets a lot of criticism from people who many times just simply aren't aware of all of the things that they do. And this is an example of something that they do with the staff time that we pay for, basically. Okay, anything else on legislative review, Carter, that you can think of?
Well, Mr. Mayor, if it's okay, I can talk a little bit about that joint proposal with the county.
Ah, thank you, yes.
Yeah, you bet. A number of weeks ago, the city organization, WAN, sat down with the county organization, and I can't remember their acronym exactly, but
WCCA.
WCCA, thank you, because there's a Waco too, I wasn't sure. Anyway, so effectively a bunch of commissioners and a bunch of mayors and council people, myself, from around the state sat down, kind of facilitated by our new director and the county director, who happens to also be new, Mr. Ryman and Mr. Frazier. And the basic mission that we had that day was actually given to us by the legislature, which said, we'll take your input. Give us a joint proposal that deals with local taxation, and let's see what it is that we can figure out. So we all kind of got in a room up at the event center and locked the doors, and not really, but we did have a lot of, in my opinion, pretty groundbreaking conversation that hadn't taken place between the two organizations that I can remember in probably 20 years. And the upshot of it was basically that the counties don't really want to lose a lot of their say as it relates to municipal tax initiatives that may be needing to come forward, and the municipalities were concerned that they don't have any say as it relates to potentially needing to do something independent of counties and the surrounding municipalities, which Natrona is a classic case example of, and many counties are. So the idea was that that indeed in counties where county delegations or the commissioners don't have projects that they want to put forward, that indeed they would sign off on municipalities to run a proposal without needing to do all the other entities throughout the county.
For a 6th cent.
For a 6th cent, that's right, which for most counties that would be a specific purpose kind of excise tax. And of course the advantage with those kinds of taxes is it's generally a limited duration, typically for the duration of the project, and of course it then becomes a sunset initiative once it's collected.
And wasn't a part of the proposal that the 5th cent just be permanent statewide and devoted to local and earmarked for local funding?
The proposal as we discussed it in that meeting was not contingent upon the counties making it permanent. Certainly it assumed that the 5th penny was in place by the traditional means that those pennies come into place.
Okay.
And you will note that there are counties that have made it permanent through the process that they currently have available to them to do that. But where counties don't have that, it wasn't necessarily a requirement that it be permanent, but rather it be in place through the means that are available to make that happen.
And you make it permanent by having the majority of the municipalities or governmental entities agree.
Statute currently allows for commissioners to make that decision if I believe it's actually 75% of the urban population of that county, whatever county that might be, has come forward to the commissioners and said, this is what we want to have happen. Then the commissioners actually currently, without a vote, can make that decision on their own.
Okay.
And as you know, there are some counties that have done that and some that have not, and Natrona being one. But that's a current allowance for statute.
Sorry to interrupt your review, but
No, that's okay.
so the 6th cent could be the way we understand it now, which would be all of the entities agreeing to put something on the ballot with some mix of projects that would be of benefit to the various entities. Or the commissioners saying, we don't have a need for this, and we're okay with you going to your population only for this specific project, which could happen for us if our commissioners agreed to say, let us put the police station before just the Casper residents.
Right. If the new, law
If
idea
it passes.
Correct.
And you all know one of the arguments that's made is, we don't get to vote for the 9 of you, but if the citizens of Casper agree to add a 6th cent, we still have to pay it because all of the shopping is in Casper. So that's the taxation without representation argument. But that was more or less resolved in this argument, this arrangement.
That was kind of the consensus of the group. Yeah, that's right. I'm unclear until the draft comes out from the committee discussion as to what actually made it into the text of the LSO draft. And so I would say let's look at that, particularly as a part of our legislative agenda development, to be sure that it's reflective of what council would prefer, or whatever, support, endorse, etc.
Now, it's a step forward, because last time the two associations were essentially at odds, and that's a prescription for nothing to happen. So, questions?
Well, but still though, as I understand this proposal, it would still in essence give the county commissioners a veto over a city going forward with anything, and I don't think that's a real good thing. It might be, you know, this proposal might be a fallback, and it might be about all that we can hope to get, but I'd still rather see us go for and say, hey, you guys give lip service and you talk about home rule and you talk about all this stuff, well, pony up and let's go, or else, you know, stop saying that. But you know, this compromise, while not ideal, might be about all we can get, but I still don't find it to be real palatable, but it might be all we can get, so.
It's better than what we have now.
Certainly is.
And Mr. Mayor, Councilman Huber is correct. The statutes allow for commissioners to keep their thumb on what cities and towns can do from a taxation standpoint. And there's probably a whole variety of reasons and schools of thought as to why that is, but that is the way it is right now.
So we have a good working relationship with our commissioners.
We do.
Some municipalities do not, and you know, we'll try to work with them, and we'll try to work things cooperatively as we always have.
But that can change with the personalities at the next election too.
Absolutely.
Of course. Anything else?
No, sir.
Okay, let's go around. Anything? You got anything, Ken?
The only thing I got is, we found out we had mailboxes last week, so that's nice. Thanks for pointing that out, by the way.
It wasn't me.
But, one of the letters that I received that I wanna apologize whoever can get it to, Kathy Frazier, that sent a letter in, talking about the bonuses, thanking us for the part-time and the full-time people receiving bonuses. But something that she pointed out in here is, she says, I work an average 400 to 500 hours a year, more hours than some of the other part-time employees that work at the landfill, because that's where she works. That she did not qualify because she was kind of seasonal more, that she didn't qualify for bonuses because she was seasonal, but she worked more hours than some of the employees. So I hope when something like that comes up, if possible, we can consider those, maybe do it by hours, I don't know, but just that, it's cool that she thanked us, but she pointed out what she did, and I thought that was cool. So I apologize to her that I never read that, got it sooner, but I just want to point that out. If we look at it again, maybe we could look at more what you work hours. So that's all I have.
Okay, Kristen?
Nothing tonight?
Steve?
Just don't forget, next June is the CNFR. You knew you were gonna get that from me. The other Steve can fill you in if he wants to say anything.
The other Steve.
Steve too.
Bob?
Yeah, here, a few weeks ago, we had a discussion with the folks at R321 regarding their problem with their parking lot. And I guess I'd still like to see if we might get involved in trying to help them get something done with the state. That particular piece of ground is really not significant to the state in terms of their 14-acre campus or whatever it is, but it would really be a big help to R321. And you know, there's also, they've also got neighbors that they have some interest in helping get that property. 'Cause it's a small area, but it's really important for those guys. And I'd like to see us at least see if we could get the state at least partly come to the table. And some way. I'm not suggesting any particular way, but you know, we did have some help in trying to get our 321 there, and perhaps it was an oversight that wasn't deeded to them, but it isn't. So.
Nothing.
We did go to the CNFR meeting yesterday. There's a few good changes taking place this year. We're looking at some early ticket sales around Christmas time, or before, for the Christmas season itself. Yeah, I think it's gonna be a good season, and I am not riding a bull, so it's a good idea, but it's not gonna happen. So.
Maybe others do.
I'm sorry, I forgot one. The AOPA, airplane pilots, something like that, they want to have a get-together, and we've heard a little about it, I'm sure. That really does have a lot of impact on the city. These people fly their airplanes in and they go to forums and do whatever for about 2 or 3 days, but not many people that fly their airplane in stay in the airplane.
Yeah.
And they all own an airplane so they can eat in our restaurants. And I wouldn't be surprised if we get asked to help participate in that, but it's gonna take some money to get that done. But just kind of a reminder that that's out there, but it could be a really good thing for the city of Casper.
Anything else?
I don't know if this is a good time to bring it up or not, but last rodeo season, we did give $10,000 towards ticket sales, of which the idea didn't really take off like we thought it would. So there were very few tickets that were sold. Very, very small amount of money was actually spent. But nobody got billed for that. In fact, Visit Casper ended up picking up a bill on that. We're looking at doing something similar to that this year, so we may come back around doing that ask again. We did not. I mean, we approved it last year, but we didn't get billed. We didn't spend any money, so we'll probably come back around and ask that same thing that we had last year, just to help out with the event itself. So.
We already give about 40K to them.
Yeah. Sean?
Nothing.
A couple things for me. Was at the census grand opening last Friday, which was a big deal. Casper is the office for the state of Wyoming. I congratulated them on their choice. The census is really going to ramp up, and it's a big deal for us to get an accurate count and to count as many people as we could possibly count as citizens of Casper, because we know the impact of that. So it'll be important for us, even though the actual count takes place in April, to be very public about the importance of the census in all of our discussions, to have it be part of our conversation, because people are uncounted in every census. And the more accurate that count is, the more we all benefit, not just from a financial standpoint, but just accuracy in terms of who's living here, what the demographics, the demographic trends, so that the councils, this council and councils that come after us, can make decisions that will be ahead of those trends as we see them developing. So it just needs to be part of our conversation regularly from this point until the end of March, when the census starts. Carter and I were also at the Opportunity Zone discussion with the development community last Wednesday, and we were explaining to them some of the benefits, and they've of course have heard more about Opportunity Zones previously, and we were talking with them about some of the things that we will hopefully see, particularly in the old Yellowstone district, which is all in an Opportunity Zone. Talk to them a little bit about the Midwest project and some of the development opportunities that will be there with that riverfront project of theirs. And again, that's also something that we should continue to be talking about, so that people are aware that there are many benefits to people who want to invest in these underserved or underdeveloped areas. And ours stretches again all the way from Beverly Street to Mills. And to try to get more and more interest in people taking advantage of these capital gains relief options that are part of that tax law, because they're time limited, and the 2026 apparently is a hard deadline that they will not go beyond, and so the sooner people get involved in this, the better. And I'm hopeful that it will convince some of our developers to take some risks that maybe they haven't been willing to take up to now, and so we'll see if that happens. And I think that's it for me. Thank you all. See you next Tuesday.
Thanks, everybody.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oops. Good thing I have you guys here.
Damn, who said that?
Yeah, before everybody walks out the door, don't anybody leave.
Who said that?
Do you people not like to eat dinner?
It's in our file here somewhere. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Vice Mayor. Okay.
If you wanted it or not.
Oh, did you? Follow the script accurately here.
Okay.
I now call the October 8th, 2019 special council meeting to order. All council members are present. The notice of an executive session to take place at this date and during this meeting was given. We have a matter to discuss regarding land acquisition. Therefore, the chair would entertain a motion to adjourn into executive session, and at the conclusion of that executive session to reconvene the special meeting solely for the purpose of adjournment of this special meeting.
Second.
Moved by Councilman Hopkins, seconded by Councilman Friel. There being majority members present and a motion to adjourn into an executive session have been moved and seconded, and that motion requiring a 2/3 majority of the council present. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion passes. A greater than 2/3 majority of council present voted in favor of the motion. We are hereby adjourned into executive session. Let's just take a minute. I've got to use the restroom. I'm sure other people could use just a minute break, and then we'll get started, okay?
Are you aware that we're responsible for reserving the softball fields, checking about umpires, concessions, all that kind of stuff? Didn't know whether you were or not.
Yep. Yeah, they told us that day one. They said you now have all the softball.
Okay. Because it sounded like a couple of comments were made, it might have been before you got there, kind of down on my end of the table, that